Let's continue our conversation about landscape pesticides by talking about the laws and regulations that govern their use, as well as a little bit more about safety in their storage, their application, protecting people and the environment. So here we go with our topic of the day, pesticide regulations and safety. The information we're going to cover today is from the state of California, the Department of Pesticide Regulations, in particular, their most recent update to the law. Now, these laws are continuously updated, so it's important that you always stay informed and check for new updates and changes in time. Some of the foundational aspects of what we talk about today will be timeless and always relevant. However, new things are always discovered and the regulations are changing. So it's important to stay current and well informed. The Department of Pesticide Regulation was created in 1991, and it is a group within the California Environmental Protection Agency. Local enforcement of the statewide rules is carried out by the County Agricultural Commissioners, or the CACs. And it's the CACs who do the enforcement. They may fine up to $5,000 for each violation. The DPR and the CAC may revoke a business's pesticide license or its county registration. So in the County of San Diego, it is the Agriculture Weights and Measures group that is acting as the CAC by enforcing statewide pesticide regulations. There are several types of licenses. Licenses are held by businesses. So the business could be a pest control business, like a pest control for hire. It could be a pest control dealer, which would deal in the sales of pesticides and chemicals. It could be a pesticide broker. So it would be a wholesale supplier where the dealers get their chemicals from. Or you can be a maintenance gardener pest control business, and this is where landscape maintenance companies would fall. And these licenses for businesses are distinct from the licenses that individuals may carry. There are a range of individual licenses or certificates that you may go for. The most rigorous one is the Agricultural Pest Control Advisor, PCA. That would be somebody who can give pest control advice to other businesses, primarily to farms. You can have a pest control aircraft pilot certification. So if you're going to fly a crop duster airplane in agricultural settings. You can be a pest control dealer designated agent. So this would be somebody who works at a pest control dealer. And then there are the last two that are highlighted in red. Those are relevant to horticulturists dealing in landscape horticulture, the QAC and the QAL. The QAC is a qualified applicator certificate. The QAL is a qualified applicator license. So what's the difference between a QAC and a QAL? The qualified applicator certificate, QAC, is less rigorous, so it's easier to get. Pest control is not the primary reason for their business, and this would be for individuals working for government or businesses other than pest control businesses, such as golf courses and schools. So if somebody applies pesticide sometimes, but not all the time as their main job, they can have a QAC. Usually that person with a QAC should be supervised by somebody with a QAL. And when in doubt, it's better to have the QAL because that one requires more knowledge about safety regulations. And if you have a responsible qualified applicator who's licensed, then you are insured to have much more safe practices. A lot of businesses that could get away with only having a QAC, they tend to opt for the QAL recognizing that it is very important. So the qualified applicator license is more rigorous to obtain. All commercial pest control businesses, except maintenance gardener businesses, must have at least one QAL on staff at each business location to supervise pesticide handlers for the business. And again, here's where many companies go above and beyond. They ensure that anyone who is applying any pesticide has a QAL. And that is above and beyond the strictest requirements, but it's the most responsible way to ensure safe practices are had so that everybody knows what the QAL knows. Make them all get the license. Both the QAC and the QAL are issued for 2 years. They cannot be renewed unless the holder has reached a certain minimum continuing education hours. So you got to take courses, workshops, webinars. You have to stay up to date and current. Sometimes even reading an article and taking a little quiz at the end will be enough to give you an hour or two of your continuing education requirements. And you may find those articles in trade magazines and even online. Both the QAC and QAL applicants are required to take a laws and regulations exam and an exam in one of 17 categories for pest control. Here are those 17 categories, and you can see the category B, landscape maintenance, is most common for landscape horticulturists. Although you may be working on the side of roads if you're part of roadside development, then you would have a right-of-way license. You may work in restoration and be involved with forestry or aquatic environments, in which case you would have the appropriate designation. And you can see a whole list of different types of categories that you can specialize with your QAC or QAL. Remember that whichever category you're in is going to dictate the type of questions you need to answer on the exam. It's going to be specially tailored to that particular industry and business. It's a requirement that you report your usage of pesticides, and you do so by using your operator identification number, the OIN. This is also called a grower ID, because a lot of nurseries and businesses that produce plants, growers, have an OIN. This is issued by the county, and it is used for reporting and purchasing restricted use pesticides. If you're a non-agricultural pesticide user, your report must include monthly summaries of the product name and manufacturer of pesticides applied, the product registration number, the amount used, the number of applications, the month, the county, and your OIN number. So those are records you must maintain and submit monthly in order to continue having the ability to legally apply pesticides. There are some additional rules related to pesticide use near schools and daycare centers. In particular, this affects urban areas because within an urban setting, you're typically very close to some type of a school at all times. This new law took effect in January 2018. It prohibits pesticide applications within a quarter mile of public K-12 schools and licensed daycare facilities Monday through Friday between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. It also requires California growers to provide annual notification to schools and county of expected pesticide use in the upcoming year. So if you're going to apply outside of the time of operating hours, you need to give an estimate of when you expect to use pesticides, how often, what days and times, and that must be made publicly available. This is a major restriction on the type of usage, the time of day, and the overall reporting requirements. And it's very difficult for it to be enforced. However, it's important for you to be aware of it and to follow the law. Now let's talk about pesticide safety. We've mentioned a few aspects of pesticide safety in our previous lectures, but we will go into more detail here. And the general summary is to follow all label directions. because the label has a vast amount of information related to the safety of handling, the safety of storage, and the safety of application of the chemical inside the container. The first thing you want to look for is the signal word. The signal word will indicate the toxicity of the pesticide. The three standard signal words are danger, warning, and caution. And you can see they're arranged in a hierarchy so that danger is the most dangerous. Usually danger means it's life-threatening. Then there's warning, which has a risk of serious injury. And then there's caution, which has risk of minor injury. Any pesticides that have danger or warning as their signal word typically require a license, and you would need to provide your OIN in order to purchase them. Now, the things that the residential homeowners can purchase, kind of going down to the big box store and getting some bug spray, those would usually have caution as their signal word. And it's a good idea when we say to try to use less toxic pesticides, what we are talking about is looking at the signal word and trying to opt for caution if at all possible, and only use a warning or a danger if there is absolutely no alternative. So in our IPM hierarchy, caution would be much preferable over warning and even more preferable over danger. You can find more information about the toxicity of any chemical on the safety data sheet. And these used to be called material safety data sheets, MSDS. The international standard is SDS. And so the United States is slowly adopting the global standard of just calling them SDS. These are sheets that have all the information required if there's some spill or emergency of that chemical. What types of material can you use to clean it up? How should it be stored? What types of first aid should be given if there's various exposure? It is important for all businesses who use chemicals to keep a written record of the safety data sheet for each chemical that they use. And it's not enough to keep these in a binder under the seat of the truck. It's important that you train your people, if you're working with pesticides, that whatever chemical is being used, the safety data sheets are readily available, the binder is open, and the page corresponding to the chemical in use is open for immediate access. So if somebody is applying some pesticide and you're working out of a truck in a landscape, on the seat of the bench of the truck, you should have the binder open to the page related to the chemical being used. That's an important safety tip. And when there are inspections, that's something they'll be looking for. You can find the safety data sheets about pesticides in particular at the National Pesticide Information Center. The link is shared in the presentation. Now let's discuss the potential exposure pathways in greater detail. Remember that all pesticides are toxic and therefore poisonous in some way. And there are 4 primary exposure pathways. These are ways in which a person can become dangerously exposed to pesticides. The 4 exposure pathways are dermal, via absorption through the skin, oral, through the mouth, respiratory, through the lungs, and ocular, through the eyes. These 4 pathways are very important to protect in order to keep the applicator and any people that may come in contact with the pesticide safe. We see some images down below of acute skin exposure to pesticides. And we can see a diagram on the right-hand side showing various exposure pathways, and the numbers corresponding to those areas are related to the severity of exposure, the frequency and the ease at which you can become exposed in those various parts of your body. Let's talk about the respiratory exposure pathway, the lungs. If anybody is exposed and becomes sick due to pesticide contamination via the lungs, it's important to take them away from the area, at least 100 feet away outdoors. You want to make sure that the wind is blowing away from you, and you want to wear a respirator anytime the label requires one. A respirator is called that because it must be fit tested and trained. It's not simply a dust mask or a cloth mask. A respirator is something that requires training in a business. We all are now familiar with N95 as a rating for masks, and that is technically a respirator. The N95 should have 2 straps, and it should have a metal clasp on the top bridge of the nose and should be able to be easily fit. It's important to pay special attention to applicators who have facial hair because that may affect the fit of the respirator. And you can have respirators that go all the way up in protection to the diagram on the right-hand side. All of these would need to have a fit test and a training to ensure that the workers know how to properly wear them, and also to verify that the respirator itself does not inhibit the applicator's ability to breathe well. Not every single person can easily use every single type of respirator, so the training should be performed by a medical expert who has the expertise to assess respirator fits. Now let's talk about the ocular exposure pathway, the eyes. You must wear eye protection when you mix, load, or apply pesticides and clean or repair equipment that was used for pesticides. Eye protection is important and it must always be worn. If you ever see somebody not wearing eye protection having to do with anything related to pesticides, then they are not properly protected. Eye protection may include safety glasses with temple and brow protection, goggles, a face shield, and a full face mask. Depending on the activity, there will be different levels of safety required, but it's important that you follow the label requirements and make sure eye protection is always worn. If you are exposed in the eyes, it's important to have eye wash, either a sink that is specially designed to rinse the eyes, or a sanitary bottle of water with the strict purpose of cleaning the eyes. And you would need to rinse the eyes with plenty of water for at least 15 minutes. Do not use a hard spray. A gentle flow from a shower, faucet, hose, or water bottle would be more appropriate. You want to blink while you're rinsing, and you never want to force anybody else's eyes open if you are trying to assist them with washing their eyes. Let's talk about the skin exposure pathway, the dermal pathway. It is very important that you wash your hands before eating, drinking, smoking, or going to the bathroom after you have handled pesticides in any form. It is important to wear plastic gloves while applying pesticides or mixing, unless the label says not to. It will very rarely say not to, but if the label says do not wear plastic gloves, then do not do so. It is a requirement that an employer must provide clean coveralls to any employee applying pesticides, and the coveralls must be long-sleeved in the shirt and pants. While wearing coveralls, it is important to watch for heat stress on a hot day. And if you have any exposure to the skin, it's important that you take off all clothes that have pesticides on them. You want to shower with soap and make sure you clean under your nails in particular. It's important to wash your hair and get dressed only in clean clothes. All of these simple hygiene techniques will go a long way to keep you protected from exposure of pesticide through the skin. Let's take a closer look at washing the work clothing worn while applying or mixing pesticides. It is important that you wear clean work clothes every day. Do not wear the clothes you wore yesterday if you were working with pesticides. You want to wash your clothes as soon as you can. Don't come home and hug or touch your family until you have changed and cleaned your clothes. You want to make sure you shower and wash your hair. Pay special attention to leather. Leather watch bands, belts, and boots cannot be cleaned of pesticide residue because that's technically animal skin. So be very cautious about leather material, and never take your PPE home to clean it. So leave the personal protective equipment that you use to apply pesticides, leave that at the job, at the work site, wherever your job stores its equipment, and clean it there on site. Don't have your employees take their equipment home to wash. That just increases the chances of exposure. Make sure all the clothing is cleaned at the job site and employees go home clean, ready to be with their families, and then they can clean themselves even more when they get there. But don't have them bring any equipment or PPE home. Now let's take a look at rinsing out the pesticide containers. While rinsing and cleaning the containers, it's important that you wear all the required personal protective equipment. You want to fill the pesticide container about a quarter full with water, close it tightly and shake it to get water all over the inside of the container. And then you pour all of this rinse water into the mix tank so that it will be applied with the pesticide the next time you apply. And then you repeat steps 2, 3, and 4 at least 2 more times. So the question is, how many times do you rinse out a container after applying pesticides? At least 3 times. Triple rinse all of your containers and don't pour the water on the ground. Put the water back into the mix tank. Now let's talk about first aid, and we'll deal with the question of what should I do if someone collapses while using pesticides? You want to get the person away from the pesticide if you can without hurting yourself. Get help right away. If you have a phone, call 911. If the person is not breathing, give CPR until emergency responders arrive. Tell the emergency responders about the pesticide, and remember that the pesticide may not be the problem. However, it's important to know the name of the chemical just in case it was a problem or in case it may interfere with part of the treatment. What should I do if someone swallows a pesticide? You want to get help right away, and if you have a phone, call 911. If the person is awake and alert, you follow the first aid instructions on the label. If the person is sleepy or unconscious from poisoning and you don't have a phone, take them to the hospital right away. It is very important that you do not give them anything to eat or drink, including water, and you do not try to make them throw up. You don't know if this is going to have a worse effect. Now let's talk about storing pesticides safely. You want to only store pesticides in the original container and with the appropriate label. Do not put it in any other container for storage, and do not take the label off so that they all look the same. That defeats the purpose of the label. Especially, you want to never store pesticides in any food or drink containers, anything reused or recycled, only in the original container. You want to store the pesticides in a locked and labeled cabinet out of reach to children and pets. Here's an image that is quite startling and shocking. We see many safety hazards, and I don't know if the child is posing to illustrate unsafe practices, but you can see plenty of chemicals, fertilizers, and pesticides on the bottom shelf of a work shed, and there's nothing to stop anybody from coming in and having an exposure. So on our previous slide, you see the proper storage cabinet. It's able to be locked. It is able to withstand fire and spills. You want to make sure that you do not store any pesticides near food, clothing, or even animal feed. You want to protect them from moisture and extreme heat and cold. Here we see some heavy-duty pesticide storage closets. They have ramps so that you can wheel up material without having to handle it unsafely. And there's labels on the door that tell you what are the contents inside. It's important that you place your pesticides in a plastic tub to facilitate the cleanup if there's a leak. And you want the storage area to be well ventilated. You want to check the containers periodically for leaks and properly dispose of any damaged, leaking, or unwanted containers. Here's an image of what not to do. This is a storage container filled with all kinds of chemicals. And yes, most of these look like they're in the original packaging and the label is intact. However, it's quite messy. It's not secure. There could be plenty of leaks here. And this is just too much material overall. You don't want to have a situation like this. But is a situation like this common? Absolutely, this is common. It's important that we practice good sanitation and hygiene, and any place you work, you want to be the person who's doing the responsible thing, preventing unsafe conditions. Here's an even worse image. Here's a bunch of chemicals that, first of all, take a look at the signal word. It says poison with the skull and crossbones. That's a danger signal word. So very toxic chemical, not being stored properly. And you can tell these are so old that a lot of the packaging is even probably going to be falling apart, leaking out of its package, mixing with other things. This is a severe human health hazard. And here we see a pile of empty containers or used containers, maybe not completely empty. And once again, this is just unsanitary, and you want to not allow any business you work for or are in charge of to get into a situation like this. Properly dispose of the chemical all the time, every time. Here's what it should look like. So here is a clean room that is specifically meant for storing pesticides. They have enough inventory to not run out. You can see there's more than one of each item, but when they use up one, they've got a spare and they can order the next one. So you have a good rotation of materials. Everything is visible. The label is easy to read, and all of the chemicals are held in clear tubs so that if there's a leak, it will be more likely to go into the tub, easier to clean up than onto the floor or having a big spill. Any additional considerations you may want to make, especially in California, is trying to secure the shelf to the wall in case of an earthquake. You may even run a little bungee cord across the front of the shelf. So that way, if there is any earthquake or rocking, the material will be more likely to stay on the shelf and not fall all on the floor. Also notice that they've painted their walls white and the room is very clean and bright. This is how the storage area should look. The white walls are very useful in helping to detect any leaks or stains that may be getting outside of the containers. This is what it should look like. Now let's talk about the various pesticide formulations and how they impact the application and use of the chemical. A pesticide formulation is a mixture of active and inert ingredients which make the final product simpler, safer, and more efficacious to apply to a target pest. Just like when you look at the ingredients of medicine or toothpaste, you see that there are active ingredients, the thing that's actually doing the work, and then there may be other ingredients. Those other ingredients might help the active ingredient to do its job, but they may be applied at different situations for different environmental contexts. Let's take a look at these in greater detail. So we have various types of formulations. You can see a chart on the right-hand side showing the different formulations. We have the abbreviation as well as the standard form. And there's three main types. The first type is a dry sprayable type. This would be a wettable powder or a water dispersible granule. The next type is a liquid sprayable. This would be a soluble concentrate, suspension concentrate, emulsifiable concentrate, microemulsion, oil dispersion, or microencapsulated particles. These are all different forms. And then we have a dry spreadable granule. This would be a soil applied granule oftentimes mixed in with a fertilizer. The active ingredient of the formulation is a substance that prevents, kills, or repels a pest, or acts as a plant regulator, desiccant, defoliant, synergist, or nitrogen stabilizer. What's a synergist, you may ask? Well, a synergist is a type of active ingredient that enhances another active ingredient's ability to kill the pest while using the minimum amount of active ingredient, but they do not themselves possess pesticidal properties. The other ingredients, or the inert ingredients, these are things that may aid in the application of the active ingredient. These are things like solvents, carriers, and adjuvants. A spray adjuvant is added to a pesticide product in order to enhance the pesticide's performance or the physical properties of the spray mixture. Some examples of adjuvants would be surfactants, drift control agents, thickeners, and colorants. A surfactant is an abbreviated term used to describe a surface acting agent. This is also known as a wetting agent or a spreader. This is a material that will physically change the surface tension of the droplet. And this is particularly useful when applying a pesticide to a plant with waxy or hairy leaves. Take a look at the image below, and you can see what it looks like without and then with a surfactant applied. Without the surfactant, you have water that just beads and rolls right off the leaf. But if you add a wetting agent, a surface acting agent to the mix, then it will stay wet on the leaf. There's a side view, which is a drawing showing without the surfactant, the leaf stays dry. With the surfactant, the leaf gets wet. There are drift control agents. Small droplets tend to drift away from the targeted area. And so a drift control agent usually increases the average droplet size, which helps to improve the on-target placement of the pesticide spray. There's also thickeners, which will increase the viscosity of the spray mixture, and a thickener will slow the evaporation after the spray has been deposited. And then finally, there are colorants. Colorants are used to alter the color of spray solutions to visually aid in the placement of the spray solution. Here we can see an image of a person applying a pesticide, presumably, could also be a fertilizer, and a colorant has been added. And this colorant is usually a bluish green in color, and it's used to help you know if you were there before or not. If you missed a spot or if you went over, you'll be able to see it. A lot of public gardens and parks like to avoid using the colorant because it's a little bit unsightly and it doesn't really look good if you are slightly imprecise with your application. However, I encourage the use of colorants because you want to ensure safe practices. If you don't want people to see the color, then maybe you shouldn't be spraying in the first place. And the color doesn't last for very long. It will dissipate, and it's a very good indicator of how skillfully you are applying the material. And so I encourage its use. And again, if you have issues with people seeing the color, maybe you have issues with people seeing the practice. Now let's take a look at calibration of the pesticide equipment. It's important to be able to calibrate your equipment so you know that what you're doing is accurate. And when you do calibration before applying pesticide, you use water. Water is a safe way to ensure that your equipment is properly calibrated. So how do you do it? First, you mark off an area 10 feet by 10 feet. You fill the sprayer with a water to a known mark and spray the area. Then you refill the sprayer, measuring the amount of water required to refill to the original level. And with that amount of water and that area, you can determine the per acre rate of spray delivery. So let's take a look at an example. We want to determine the rate for wettable powder in a sprayer. The label prescribes 2 pounds per 55 gallons of water. How much wettable powder should be added to a 3-gallon sprayer? Remember that 1 pound equals 16 ounces. 2 pounds divided by 55 gallons times 3 times 16, we get 1.7 ounces. So there we go with a deeper dive into the safety, the regulations, the laws, the licensure, and the application of chemical pesticides. I hope you find this information important, if not interesting. Whether or not you will be using chemical pesticides in any landscape setting, it's very important that you know the rules so that you don't do the wrong thing and you can help others to avoid doing the wrong thing. There are many people out there and there are very few enforcement agencies. It's very difficult to make sure every single person does the proper thing every single time. But trust me, all of these regulations were made because something bad happened one time, at least one time. And every time something bad happens, we learn from it and we apply a new regulation to keep people safe and healthy. So if you're going to be using pesticides, if you're going to be supervising anybody who uses pesticides, it's very important that you know these rules and you follow the rules. Help others to do the same as well. How about organic pesticides? How about neem oil and some of the other stuff? That's natural, right? Can't I ignore all of these rules and laws? No, you cannot. It's very important that whether the chemical is synthetic or naturally derived, we treat it exactly the same. We read the label, we follow the instructions, we pay attention to the signal word, we wear the appropriate PPE, and if we're getting paid, we need to be licensed, because any kind of chemical has the same type of ability to cause harm, whether it came from a natural source or a synthetic source. That doesn't necessarily tell you the level of danger. So it's very important to treat all chemical pesticides the same way, use the same safety precautions, and even then, when you're making your selections, sure, go for the organic, go for the natural, and more importantly, choose the lower toxicity signal word, and you will have a much safer time with your people, with yourself, with your environment, and we can make sure we all have a healthy landscape and make sure we're around the next day to do it all over again. Thanks a lot.